Welcome to this tutorial. In the following, we will guide you step by step through the European legislative procedure and explain how laws are made in the European Union. This video was produced with financial support from the European Union. However, the views expressed are those of the author only and do not necessarily reflect those of the European Union or the European Education and Culture Executive Agency. The European Union is a unique political system. It cannot be directly compared to any other system in the world. The reason is that formal power lies with the member states. Through common treaties, they delegate certain executive responsibilities to the European Commission, which carries out these tasks on their behalf. Yes, this system is complex. And yes, it requires time, patience, and compromise. But that is exactly its strength. The EU is not designed to produce quick winners. Instead, it aims to create sustainable decisions for more than 450 million citizens. Most people know the main EU institutions, but how do they actually work together? Who prepares laws? Who decides and how? How are citizens involved? And who ensures that laws are implemented correctly? Before any EU decision is made, a broad consensus must be negotiated. This involves governments of 27 member states, bureaucrats from around 350 national ministries, and 720 members of the European Parliament from around 200 parties. This requires constant exchange of ideas, information, and interests. At the start of each legislative period, the Commission President presents a 5-year work programme. It outlines priorities and planned legislation. The European Parliament must approve it. Based on this, the President sends mission letters to commissioners who instruct Directorates General to develop legislative proposals. Many initiatives take time. Gradual policy development starts with green papers, which launch discussions. This can lead to white papers outlining concrete policy approaches. The Commission exchanges information with interest groups and lobbyists. Meetings between high officials and lobbyists must be publicly announced 2 weeks in advance. Citizens can also influence legislation. A European Citizens Initiative requires over 1 million signatures from at least a quarter of member states. It can trigger debates and might lead to legislation. EU legislation is therefore not created in isolation, but through continuous dialogue with various stakeholders and public input. The development of EU legislation starts with long-term planning. From these broader priorities, presented in the 5 years working programme and mission letters, legislative initiatives are gradually translated into more concrete annual working programmes. This structured planning process ensures that all relevant actors, whether institutions, stakeholders, or interest groups, are informed well in advance and can prepare for upcoming legislative discussions. In practice, this is a large-scale effort. Around 20,000 officials in the European Commission's 32 Directorates General work on preparing new legislation. They are supported by approximately 850 expert committees and around 40 specialised EU agencies, which contribute technical knowledge and policy expertise. Before the European Commission begins drafting a specific law, it first gathers input from a wide range of actors. This includes experts, stakeholders, and the general public. Through formal public consultations, which can last up to 3 months, citizens, organisations, and businesses are given the opportunity to share their views. This ensures that different perspectives are taken into account from the very beginning. Based on this input, the Commission develops a legislative proposal. But before it can move forward, it must undergo several important checks. First, the Commission conducts an impact assessment. This step evaluates the expected economic, social, and environmental effects of the proposal, as well as the costs and resources required for implementation. Next, the proposal enters an internal coordination phase within the Commission, known as the inter-service consultation. During this process, other Directorates General review the proposal and provide feedback. This phase typically lasts 10 working days. Once the internal coordination is complete, the proposal is submitted to the Secretary-General and placed on the agenda of the College of Commissioners. The College meets every Wednesday morning to discuss and vote on legislative proposals. If the proposal is adopted, it officially becomes a Commission legislative proposal. Before it moves on, the proposal also undergoes a final legal review by the Commission's legal service to ensure that it is fully compatible with the EU treaties. In this way, EU legislation is carefully prepared through consultation, impact analysis, internal coordination, and legal scrutiny before entering the formal legislative process. Only after all these steps have been completed is the proposal formally submitted to the European Parliament and the Council of the European Union, where the political negotiations and the legislative decision-making process begin. At the same time, two important advisory bodies are consulted. The European Economic and Social Committee represents organised civil society and the social partners, such as employers' organisations and trade unions. The Committee of the Regions, on the other hand, represents regional and local authorities, including municipalities, regions, and federal states. Both institutions are invited to examine the proposal and submit their opinions within 8 weeks. At the same time, the proposal is also sent to all national parliaments of the EU member states. Their task is to check whether the proposal respects the principle of subsidiarity, meaning that decisions should be taken as closely as possible to the citizens and only at EU level when this is more effective. If 1/3 of national parliaments believe that this principle has been violated, the so-called yellow card procedure is triggered. In this case, the European Commission must review the proposal and either modify it or explain why it should still proceed. If more than half of the national parliaments raise objections, the orange card procedure applies. This means that both the European Parliament and the Council of the EU must vote on whether the proposal should continue through the legislative process. Once all opinions have been delivered and these checks have been completed, the legislative work in the European Parliament and the Council of the European Union can formally begin. With the creation of the European Union in 1992, the European Parliament became an equal lawmaker alongside the Council of the European Union. Since then, EU citizens have had a direct voice in the European legislative process. Once the European Commission submits a legislative proposal, the European Parliament is the first institution to examine it. The 720 members of the European Parliament, also known as MEPs, see themselves primarily as representatives of the roughly 450 million citizens of the European Union. Their role is to review the proposal, discuss possible changes, and represent the interests of EU citizens in the legislative process. Representation in the European Parliament follows the principle of digressive proportionality. This means that smaller member states receive slightly stronger representation compared to their population size. The goal is to maintain a political balance between large and small countries within the European Union. As a result, the number of seats in the Parliament ranges from a maximum of 96 seats for the largest member states to a minimum of 6 seats for the smallest ones. Germany, with around 88 million inhabitants, holds the maximum number of seats. At the other end of the scale, smaller countries such as Malta, with about 520,000 inhabitants, Cyprus, with around 1.3 million, and Luxembourg, with roughly 670,000 inhabitants, are each represented by 6 members of the European Parliament. When a legislative proposal arrives in Parliament, it is assigned to one of the 20 committees. Each committee focuses on a specific policy area such as environment, trade, or digital policy. Within the committee, the proposal, often called a legislative dossier, is examined in detail. Depending on the importance of the policy field, these committees include between 25 and 81 members. Committee work takes up roughly half of the members' working time. The remaining time is spent in plenary sessions, where all members debate and vote on legislation, as well as in maintaining contact with their constituencies. Between these meetings, members regularly meet within their political groups to exchange information and prepare for upcoming votes. For every legislative dossier, one member of the European Parliament is appointed as the rapporteur. The rapporteur takes the lead on the dossier, managing the legislative process within the Parliament, coordinating proposed amendments and representing the Parliament in negotiations with the Council of the European Union and the European Commission. At the same time, the other political groups appoint shadow rapporteurs. They closely follow the negotiations, represent the political position of their group, and help shape possible compromises. Because there is no fixed government opposition majority at the EU level, the European Parliament works largely through negotiation and compromise. Political agreements are often discussed and refined until the very last moment in order to build majorities across political groups and national borders. MEPs are organised in pan-European political groups that bring together parties from different EU countries with similar political goals. In some cases, several parties from the same country can even belong to the same political group. For example, in the Liberal Renew Europe group, 4 different French parties are represented. This also means that political groups in the European Parliament often include a wide range of interests and viewpoints. As a result, it is not uncommon for members of the same political group to hold different positions on specific issues. Because of this diversity, votes within a political group are not always completely uniform. In each parliamentary committee, there is one coordinator of each party group who serve as a proxy between the party group and its members in the party group. After the European Parliament has examined the proposal, the final decision is taken by the Council of the European Union. In the Council, the interests of all EU member states are represented. Each EU country is represented by officials from its national ministries who work permanently in Brussels. These officials are known as permanent representatives. Together, they form a body called COREPER, which stands for the Committee of Permanent Representatives. All member states maintain these permanent representations in Brussels. Their representatives meet regularly with their counterparts from other EU countries. In these meetings, they discuss legislative proposals, negotiate compromises, and coordinate the positions of their national governments. This preparation ensures that when ministers meet in the Council of the European Union, many key issues have already been clarified at COREPER level. The permanent representatives are supported by experts from the national ministries. These experts meet in around 150 council working groups, where legislative proposals are examined and negotiated in detail. At this stage, the discussions focus mainly on the technical aspects of a proposal. Experts analyse the details of the legislation, clarify open questions, and try to find practical solutions that work for all member states. Once these technical issues have been resolved, the proposal moves up to COREPER. Here, the permanent representatives deal with the political dimension of the proposal and negotiate compromises between the member states. Throughout the entire process, the permanent representatives remain in close contact with their national ministries, constantly coordinating their country's negotiating position. In practice, around 85% of legislative proposals are already agreed upon at the COREPER level before formal approval by the ministers in the Council of the European Union. The meetings at all levels in the Council are chaired by the Council Presidency. The country presidency plays an important role in organising and guiding the work of the Council. Since the Treaty of Lisbon, the presidency has been organised in groups of 3 countries, known as Team Presidency. This team consists of a mix of countries representing various interests such as different geopolitical interests and economic power, as well as duration of EU membership, bringing together experienced member states and so-called newcomers. These 3 countries work together and prepare a joint programme for an 18-month period. This gives them the chance to set their own priorities in accordance with the 5 years working programme of the Commissioner-President. Within this trio, the presidency rotates every 6 months from one member state to the next. During its 6-month term, the presiding country chairs meetings, coordinates negotiations, and helps move legislative proposals forward. Although the presidency does not decide the outcome of votes, it has an important influence by setting political priorities and shaping the agenda of the Council. Most decisions in the Council of the European Union are taken using qualified majority voting. This means that a proposal is adopted if at least 55% of the member states support it, and these countries together represent at least 65% of the total EU population. This system ensures that decisions require support from both a majority of countries and a majority of citizens. In this way, it prevents either large or small member states from dominating the decision-making process and helps maintain a balance between different interests within the European Union. At the same time, the Council is traditionally a consensus-seeking body. Even though qualified majority voting is the formal rule, member states often try to reach agreement among all countries. As a result, more than 80% of legislative dossiers are adopted without any member state voting against them. To make it easier to reach compromises, negotiations between the European Parliament, the Council of the European Union, and the European Commission often take place in so-called trilogues. These trilogue meetings bring together key actors from each institution, overall about 40 to 50 people. Typically, this includes a team around the rapporteur from the European Parliament, the co-rapporteur of the country holding the Council presidency, and the responsible head of unit from the respective DG of the European Commission who prepared the proposal. Originally, trilogues were designed as a tool to resolve disagreements late in the legislative process, particularly after the second or third reading. Over time, however, they have increasingly been used much earlier in the negotiations. As a result, many compromises are now reached at an early stage. Today, around 90% of legislative proposals are already adopted in the first reading. Once a law has been adopted by both the European Parliament and the Council of the European Union, the next step is its implementation. Some EU laws are adopted as regulations. Regulations apply directly and uniformly in all member states as soon as they enter into force. This means that national governments do not need to pass additional legislation for them to take effect. Other laws take the form of directives. Directives set common goals at the European level, but they allow member states to decide how these goals should be implemented in national law. Usually, countries are given 2 to 4 years to transpose a directive into their own legal systems. In practice, regulations are used much more frequently. In 2020, 540 regulations and 11 directives have been adopted. Once EU legislation has been adopted, the next step is its implementation. To support this process, the European Union often relies on so-called comitology committees. These committees bring together representatives from the member states, usually civil servants from national ministries, or subject matter experts. The meetings are chaired by a representative of the European Commission who does not have voting rights. In practice, around 300 comitology committees meet every year. Their main task is to support the European Commission when it exercises its implementing powers, particularly when EU directives and regulations are applied in practice. By bringing together national authorities, these committees create a structured dialogue between the Commission and the Member States and help ensure that EU rules can be implemented effectively under the different conditions in each country. In this process, committees assist the Commission mainly through examination procedures or advisory procedures. In the advisory procedure, the committee plays a consultative role, which gives the Commission considerable flexibility when adopting the final measures. The committee delivers an opinion by simple majority, which is recorded in the official minutes. The Commission must take this opinion into account as far as possible, but ultimately adopts the measures it considers necessary. Importantly, implementing acts cannot be vetoed by the European Parliament or the Council. Together, these mechanisms help ensure that EU legislation is applied consistently across all member states, while still taking national realities and administrative conditions into account. The European Commission also plays an important role after EU laws have been adopted. It monitors whether member states actually comply with EU law. If a member state fails to implement or correctly apply EU legislation, the Commission can start infringement proceedings. In such cases, the matter can ultimately be brought before the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg, which decides whether EU law has been violated. As of March 2026, there were 1,611 infringement cases pending before the court, including 59 cases involving Austria. At first glance, the European decision-making system may seem very complex. But this complexity has a purpose. It ensures that a wide range of voices are heard and that the interests of many different countries, political groups, and citizens are taken into account when decisions are made. So yes, the system is complex, but it is designed to work for 450 million people across 27 member states, balancing different perspectives and interests when shaping European policies. This video was produced by Bernhard Zeilinger, head of the Political Science Department of the University of Applied Sciences BFI Vienna.